Hello everyone and welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to explain why logic is not a priori. There's this common argument that a lot of people have regarding logic, thinking that it's something that you can discover without reference to reality, without looking at reality first. It's something that is simply true just in general, through mental construct only, that you can come to through your consciousness alone, through thinking alone. This is really fallacious, and it's ultimately really damaging, because it basically, when you think like this, it places the sort of separation between mind and body, the separation between your consciousness and reality, or these ideas that reality isn't the source of everything, and there's certain things that your mind does outside of reality. And essentially, this leads you to being rationalistic. It leads you to starting to come up with sort of premises in your head, and that being the only place that they are, without reference to reality. And this leads to sloppy thinking that doesn't actually refer to reality. So, logic is not a priori. A lot of people think that it is, because it is so obviously true. Like the law of identity is so obvious, or the law of non-contradiction is so obvious. It seems that we can just close our eyes and think about these things, and without looking at reality at all, and they'd be true regardless of how reality is, or if we were in any other universe, apparently, that'd be how reality is, or in another reality, which is really incoherent. When people start talking about other realities, and different things in regard to that, it's really incoherent, because it essentially assumes contingency in this reality. It assumes that certain things don't have to be a certain way, which is completely untrue. Reality is the way it is, and that is the way that it has to be. There's no dichotomy between something that is contingent, could be true regardless, or could be true whenever, and can be true like in whatever reality you want it to be true in, and absolute, something that is necessarily true for reality. Everything is necessarily true, because everything is what it is. Everything in reality is the way that it is, and there's no contingency about that. Everything basically is essentially what it is. This is a really complex point, but think about it a little bit, and I think you'll realize that it's true. And definitely read some of Opart. I think there's a chapter in here, or there's a part in here that talks about this. Hold up, let me find it. It's pretty early on. Yeah, the metaphysically given as absolute, page 23. Basically, everything that is given metaphysically, everything that you see in reality, is an absolute. It's not something that is contingent upon anything. It's necessary, basically. Actually, I'll read this quote from it. A fact is necessary if its non-existence would involve a contradiction. To put this point positively, a fact that obtains by necessity is one that obtains by identity. And since everything is what it is, since everything has a certain identity, it is necessarily true, essentially. That's a really quick explanation of that fact. But basically, yeah, that's the issue with kind of holding logic a priori. It makes you essentially separate things into contingent and necessary. And when everything is necessarily true, when everything is part of reality, it shifts your focus from looking outward to looking inward, and trying to come up with rationalistic proofs from inside your head, rather than inducing things from reality. And that's basically how you find truth. So yeah, why isn't logic a priori? Well, the thing is, with logic, we deduce it, or we come up with logic basically from experience. Logic makes no sense without experience, without reality. Logic doesn't mean anything before you sense reality, before you induce things from reality. The reason why logic seems a priori is because you discover logic basically immediately. In every single observation you make, you see the law of identity in things. Like, I observe this book. It is a book. It has certain properties. It has words in it that are true, but whatever. That's a higher level concept, true and false. But this is a book, basically. It holds all these pages, or this is an entity primarily, and it has certain properties. Like if I drop it, it's gonna fall. There's nothing that if I drop is gonna rise. 'Cause I don't have any balloons in my room, but I can't really Like if you have a balloon, that has an identity too. If you let go of it, it's going to rise up. But basically everything is what it is. You realize that from every basic act of observation you do. You also basically induce the law of contradiction. This cannot be like this is a pencil. It's not both a pencil and a pen at the same time. That might be a bad example, but that's hopefully you understand the point I'm trying to get. Like non-contradiction is something that you basically see in reality. You see things have certain properties, and you can't contradict those properties. Every act of observation, you can basically induce those things. And then causality is another thing. If you do something a certain way, that's what's going to happen. You basically can induce causality as well. All these sort of things. Well, I guess causality is not technically part of logic. Well, it kind of is. But logic is not a priori. These things they come from reality, from inducing from reality. Of course, you notice these things like immediately because you can induce these things immediately. I think Charles too kind of talked about this point, so I might mess it up, but I'd recommend watching his video on induction for more about this. But his basic point was that you can notice the law of identity. You can deduce it immediately because you can induce like existence exists and the law of identity and these sort of things because there's no external variables outside of existence. So you like the whole theory of induction being that you have to like basically isolate variables to deduce things or to induce things. You see like you set one thing constant, change everything else, and see what that constant thing sort of does, or you change or set everything else constant, change that one variable, and you see what that variable does specifically. Well, when you observe existence, there's nothing external to existence. There's no outside variable, so you can sort of notice induce certain facts about existence immediately. I might be messing this up. Definitely watch Charles Two's video about this sort of thing, because this was not a point that I plan to get into in this video. But largely, logic is not a priori. You have to experience it. Logic comes from reality. It comes from your observations about reality. Basically, when you're born, you implicitly induce all these sort of things. You implicitly discover all these things from reality. Like before you were born, before you experienced anything, you didn't know what logic was. Think about before you were born. You can't, because it's nothing. That's what consciousness is when there's no reality. What else? Well, basically, so you start by discovering logic through just implicitly, and then you can look at first you see existence. What's the chain? First you see existence and basically understand that implicitly. Then you discover logic implicitly. Then you can discover it explicitly and learn more about existence. Once you know about logic, you can learn more about existence explicitly. That might be the wrong order, but basically you begin by discovering it implicitly, then over time you think about things more and you discover logic explicitly. But either way, it comes from reality. You have to deduce these sort of or induce these laws from reality. You look at reality and then you come to these laws of logic. Because without reality, you can never know these things. The consciousness cannot know anything if it's not observing anything. There's nothing that it's referring to. Logic always needs to refer to something. It refers to reality, and it comes ultimately from reality. The idea that logic is a priori and you know it before reality doesn't make sense, because you're sort of a blank slate, and you kind of come to, you are a blank slate, and you come to these facts about reality by looking at reality. You come to understanding logic by looking at reality and seeing the law of identity, causation, basically all these sort of things, all these quick inductions, these immediate inductions. You can basically discover the laws of logic through that. And I guess if we want to talk about in another reality, the laws of logic could be different, and you could view them as completely different sort of things. But that's kind of incoherent because another reality doesn't exist. But if that kind of clarifies my point, I think a little bit, at least in my head, that thought kind of does. But yeah, I think that's all I have to say for today. Thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you all in the next video. Peace.